welcome to Algebra 1, Lesson 5. Here we go, we're going to get started. We're talking about signed numbers. So when you see a negative sign, really we could read that as the opposite of, and that comes in handy a lot with our addition and subtraction. So look up here, if you can see it. Yep, okay. You have negative 2. So that's really like saying the opposite of the opposite of 2. So here's 2. The opposite of 2 is negative 2. And the opposite of negative 2 is 2. So the opposite of 2 is 2. Let's look at another one. The opposite of the opposite of the opposite of 2. So we started here in 2. We have the opposite of 2. The opposite of negative 2. And the opposite of 2. So we went back and forth 3 times, and we landed here at negative 2. One more. Look at this one. We have the opposite of the opposite of the opposite of the opposite of 2. So we started on 2, and we go to the opposite. Then we go to the opposite of that. Then we have the opposite of that. Then we have the opposite of that. And we landed here at positive 2. Well, you don't want to be bouncing back and forth all the time, and seeing this can be very confusing. So we have a rule. If your negative signs are, if you have an even number of your negative signs, then your number is really positive. If you have an odd number of negative signs, then your answer is negative. So here I have 2 negative signs. So that means I really have a positive 2. Here I have 3 negative signs, so that means I have a negative 2. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 negative signs, so my answer is a positive 2. Just like that. So now I can use that information to solve problems that look like this. The opposite of negative 4 plus negative 2 plus the opposite of negative 6. So you're going to isolate each term so that it's a little easier to work with. Using our rule, simplify it as much as possible. The opposite of negative 4. I have 2 negative signs, so that means I really have a positive 4. Plus, I still have a negative 2. Plus, here I have 2 signs, so that means I really have a positive 6. So I have 4 plus negative 2 plus 6. Add that together, what do you get? Positive 8, that's correct. 4 plus negative 2 is 2, plus 6 is 8. And so that's your final answer. Okay, let's try this one. The opposite of 4 minus negative 5, or plus the opposite of the opposite of 5, the opposite of 3, and the opposite of 6. I'm going to isolate each one. Okay, so I have the opposite of 4. That means I have a negative 4 right there because I have 1 negative sign. Here I have 2 negative signs, so that means I'm just adding a regular old 5. Again, I have 2 negative signs, so that means plus 3. Here I have 1 negative sign, so that means that I do have a negative 6. Now I'm going to simplify. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1, plus 3 is 4, plus negative 6, subtract 2, take the sign of the larger absolute value, which is the negative. So I get a negative 2. Okay? Make sure I'm on the right one. Okay. Next we have the opposite of negative 3 minus the opposite of 2 plus the opposite of 3. Isolate each one of your terms. You don't need to draw these boxes each time. I'm just doing this to help you to isolate them. But if you'd like to draw boxes around it to make it a little clearer, that's great. So I have the opposite of 3. That's 3. Because I have 2 negatives. Here I have 3 negatives, so that means my number is indeed negative 2. Here I have 2 negatives, so that means it's actually positive. I'm going to add my 2 positives. 3 plus 3 is 6. Then add my negative, so 6 plus negative 2. That is a positive 4. Let's try another example. The opposite of 4 plus negative 2 minus the opposite of 6. This time I'm not going to isolate them. I'm just going to write it out. So I have 2 negative signs, so that means I really have a positive 4. I have 1 negative sign, so that means it is negative 2. 3 negative signs, so that means it is a negative 6. I'm going to combine my 2 negatives. Negative 2 and negative 6 is negative 8, plus a positive 4. Subtract, take the sign of the larger absolute value, so I get a negative 4. Let's try our last example. The opposite of positive 4, the opposite of 5, plus 5, the opposite of 3, plus the opposite of 6. 1 negative sign, so that means this is negative 4. 2, so this is positive. None, so that's positive. 2 signs, so that means that's also positive. 1 sign, so that means it is indeed negative. I'm going to start by adding my positives. 5 plus 5 is 10, plus 3 is 13. So I have 13 for my positive numbers. My negative numbers are 10. Add that together, and I get a positive 3. Okay, pause your video now to do your practice. Okay, I'm going to very quickly talk you through your practice. Letter A, you have 2 negative signs, so that's positive 3, and then you have 2 more negative signs of 4, so positive 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. B, you have 1 negative sign with your 5, so that's a negative 5. 2 negative signs with your 6, so that's a positive 6. Negative 5, positive 6. Subtract, that's 1. Take the sign of your larger absolute value, that's 6, so you have 1 as your answer. Letter C, you have a negative 6 because it's 1 negative. Positive 8 because it's 2 negatives. Positive 7, no negatives. Positive 3 because it's 2 negatives, and a negative 5. You add those together and you get positive 7. Positive 7. And D, you have a positive 3 because it's 2 negatives. A negative 4 because it's 3 negatives. And a positive 6 because it's 2 negatives. Add those together and you get positive 5. All right, see you in the next lesson. Let me know if you have any questions. Love you guys. Bye.